Harley-Davidson showrooms, once filled with energy, are now eerily silent, and dealerships are struggling to survive. The crisis goes beyond what you might think, and understanding the full story is crucial if you care about the future of this iconic brand. Stay with us until the end. What you learn could change the way you see Harley, and you don't want to miss it. Showroom silence. The roar of Harley showrooms has been replaced with an echo. Walk into certain dealerships today, and you will not hear the chatter of customers or the low rumble of test rides. You will hear salespeople standing idle, making small talk to pass the time, while chrome machines glisten under fluorescent lights with no one to admire them. These same floors once had waiting lists so long that riders would put down deposits months in advance, certain they were buying not just transportation, but a piece of cultural identity. Now, instead of boasting about backlogs, staff are practically begging customers to consider financing options, to test ride anything, or simply to take a bike home before the end of the quarter. In interviews, some dealers describe the atmosphere as eerie. One Wisconsin manager said he remembered when Saturdays felt like festivals, complete with food trucks, bands, and lines out the door. Today, he admitted, they feel more like funerals. The shift is not gradual, it is jarring. Empty chairs in the lounge, coffee going cold in the pot, and phones ringing less than ever. Riders who once saw Harley dealerships as community hubs are increasingly absent, leaving the brand's most loyal foot soldiers scrambling to keep their doors open. But showroom silence was only the first sign of a deeper storm brewing behind the glass. Corporate oversupply. Harley kept shipping motorcycles dealers could not sell. That single decision, made in corporate boardrooms, crushed the very partners tasked with keeping the brand alive. In a normal year, steady demand matched steady supply. But as consumer interest waned, shipments kept flowing, filling warehouses and showrooms until every square foot of space became a liability. Each unsold bike came with hidden costs. Dealers financed their floor inventory through short-term loans known as floor plan financing, and when interest rates jumped, carrying those idle motorcycles became a financial noose. Instead of being symbols of freedom, the machines lined up like unpaid bills. Dealers complained that the company was more interested in meeting quarterly shipment targets than protecting long-term relationships. The more motorcycles Harley pushed into their pipelines, the deeper the dealers sank into debt. One Illinois dealer said that what used to be a proud shipment day now felt like receiving a truckload of bricks tied around his neck. For small, family-owned dealerships, even a handful of unsold models meant thousands of dollars in monthly interest. Multiply that across seasons, and the cost became unbearable. And yet, as dealers choked on excess inventory, another betrayal appeared right under their noses, this time not from a truck, but from a web browser. If this already feels eye-opening, hit subscribe and drop a comment below with your thoughts, because your voice matters here, and the conversation is just heating up. E-commerce betrayal. Harley's own website became the dealer's biggest competitor. For decades, accessories and apparel kept dealerships alive even when motorcycle sales softened. Helmets, jackets, gloves, and t-shirts paid the bills and drew riders into the store. But as corporate leaned into digital strategy, it began offering the same gear online for 40 to 60% less than in-store prices. Customers who once browsed merchandise during service appointments realized they could order the same items from their phones at home and have them shipped directly. For dealers, this was nothing short of sabotage. One Arizona owner described how he would carefully build seasonal displays, only to watch customers snap photos of the price tags, walk out, and buy online. Harley Corporate defended the discounts as part of a global strategy to boost brand reach, but on the ground it gutted accessory sales, which had been the lifeblood of many smaller stores. The betrayal was especially bitter because dealers had invested in expensive renovations demanded by corporate, upgrading showrooms into cathedral-like spaces, just as their revenue streams were siphoned away. With merchandise sales collapsing and motorcycle stockpiling up, dealers looked desperately for answers. The balance sheet soon revealed what the showroom floor had been whispering all along. Get your gear ready for any ride. Check out our gear selection in the description now. The numbers collapse. The financials revealed a truth dealers already knew. Sales had fallen off a cliff. Harley's own earnings reports painted the picture in stark numbers. By the fourth quarter of 2024, motorcycle shipments had been cut nearly in half compared to earlier cycles. Revenue plunged by more than one-third, and the company itself forecast that 2025 sales would be flat at best and down by as much as 5% at worst. Wall Street analysts, who once touted Harley as a stable luxury brand, now warned of prolonged volatility. Investors reacted by punishing the stock, sending its value lower even as the broader market climbed. For dealers, those figures were not abstract. They were confirmation of lived reality. They explained why customers had disappeared, why phones no longer rang with new orders, and why bikes gathered dust no matter how attractive the financing deal. It was not poor salesmanship or local marketing failures, it was structural decline, visible in the ledgers that Wall Street dissected and in the unpaid invoices that dealers shuffled daily. The numbers proved the silence was not temporary, it was systemic. But as grim as those figures looked on paper, they only hinted at the cultural collapse brewing inside the Harley ecosystem, a crisis that would strike deeper than sales or shipments: aging riders. Harley's most loyal customer is aging out, and replacements are not coming. For decades, the brand thrived on the identity of the rugged baby boomer who wanted freedom on two wheels. That generation poured money into chrome, touring rigs, and the dream of the open road. But the average Harley rider today is in his mid-50s, and the trend line points only upward. Younger riders, particularly those in their 20s and 30s, are not entering the pipeline at the same rate. They look at the heavy machines, the steep price tags, and the high insurance costs, and they simply walk away. Cultural tastes also shifted. Younger consumers grew up with smartphones, ride-sharing, and electric scooters. Freedom no longer means the roar of a V-twin engine, but rather the flexibility of mobility on demand. Even those who want motorcycles often choose lighter, cheaper, and more agile models from brands like Honda, Yamaha, or KTM. The Harley mystique of rebellion does not resonate with a generation that faces student debt and sky-high housing costs. Dealers see this gap firsthand when their showrooms fail to attract fresh faces, and many admit they feel like they are selling relics to a shrinking club. And as the demographic cliff became clearer, Harley's response was to gamble on new products that were meant to lure younger buyers, but instead exposed deeper cracks. Product misfires. Harley's boldest new models backfired spectacularly. The Livewire electric motorcycle was supposed to signal a new era. It offered blistering acceleration and cutting-edge design, but the price was nearly $30,000. Riders laughed it out of showrooms, dismissing the limited range and muted sound. Harley eventually spun it into a separate company, but the damage was done. The experiment had alienated both loyalists and skeptics. Then came the Pan America, Harley's leap into the booming adventure touring market. On paper, it competed with European heavyweights like BMW and KTM. In practice, Harley fans balked at a bike that looked nothing like the cruisers they adored, while adventure riders distrusted a brand they associated with highway chrome, not dirt trails. Dealers reported Pan Americas lingering unsold for months, sometimes marked down by thousands just to move them. The Street Series was meant to provide an entry-level option for new riders, but weak build quality and uninspired styling made it an embarrassment. Harley quietly killed the line, hoping people would forget. These product bets were not just financial missteps. They revealed a company unsure of its identity. Instead of bridging generations, Harley fractured its own image. And while models failed on the showroom floor, chaos brewed in the boardroom. Boardroom chaos. While dealers fought for survival, Harley's boardroom fought itself. Leadership was supposed to provide stability during turbulence, but instead, it became a theater of conflict. CEO Jochen Seitz faced mounting criticism as sales plunged, inventories piled up, and product strategies faltered. activist shareholder H Partners launched a proxy battle, arguing that Harley had lost its way and needed fresh direction. Analysts speculated openly about whether Zeitz would survive the year, while dealers wondered who was really steering the company's future. The proxy war was not just about personalities. It exposed a deep divide over Harley's identity. Should the company double down on heritage, selling nostalgia as luxury? Or should it embrace radical reinvention, even if that meant alienating core customers? As factions argued, uncertainty trickled down to dealerships. Some dealers said they received conflicting guidance on everything from marketing budgets to event planning. Others noted that corporate communication dried up altogether, leaving them to guess at strategy. For a brand that sells itself on community and loyalty, such infighting was devastating. Harley was no longer projecting unity, it was airing its insecurities in public. And as leadership wavered, the cracks spread to the very foundations of the dealership network. Dealer shutdowns. From San Jose to Bloomsburg, the closures kept coming. In California, a long-standing dealership in San Jose abruptly shut its doors, only to reopen under new owners weeks later. Customers were left confused, and staff were left uncertain about their jobs. In Pennsylvania, a dealership that had served Bloomsburg for 35 years closed permanently, leaving a hole in the community. Local riders described the shutdown as losing a landmark, a place where generations had gathered for weekend rides and events. These closures were not isolated incidents. Across the country, dealerships quietly folded as margins collapsed. Families who had run Harley stores for decades found themselves unable to carry the burden of unsold inventory, rising interest rates, and declining foot traffic. Some shuttered without warning, leaving employees stranded. Others tried to sell to larger groups, but buyers were hesitant to take on the risk. The fallout was not only financial, it was cultural. Towns lost gathering spots, mechanics lost careers, and the Harley presence dimmed in places where it once defined local identity. Each shuttered dealership served as a warning. The crisis was no longer abstract, no longer just numbers in a report. It was visible on main streets across America. And as dealerships fell, the panic turned into a fight for survival that would force desperate moves in the months ahead. Dealer desperation. Some dealers were not selling motorcycles anymore. They were selling survival. For families that had run Harley-Davidson stores for decades, the collapse of demand was not just a business problem, but a personal crisis. Parents who had once imagined passing their dealerships down to children now worried about foreclosure notices and unpaid loans. A Tennessee dealer admitted that his family mortgaged their home to cover floor plan financing costs for bikes that simply sat in the showroom. The pride that once came with receiving a shipment of motorcycles had turned into dread. Each truckload represented another stack of debt, another month of sleepless nights. Emotional exhaustion set in. Owners described crying in back offices, wondering how to tell loyal employees that layoffs were coming. Longtime mechanics found themselves on shortened hours, while parts clerks worried whether the next paycheck would be their last. Families pleaded with corporate for relief, asking for buybacks, extended credit terms, or at least a pause on shipments. The response was rarely enough. The company insisted on discipline, but for dealers it felt like abandonment. Some resorted to deep discounts, effectively selling bikes at cost just to keep cash flowing. That desperation forced Harley to acknowledge reality. And so the company offered a corporate solution, one that executives described in technical terms, but that dealers experienced as too little, too late. Inventory right-sizing. Harley's answer was to shrink the pipeline. The company rolled out a strategy it called right-sizing, designed to reduce dealer inventory by double digits and better align shipments with actual demand. On paper, the plan looked sensible. By cutting back the number of motorcycles sent to dealers, Harley hoped to ease floor plan costs, stabilize pricing, and avoid the ugly optics of endless discounts. Executives claimed inventory levels had already dropped by more than 13%, a number they cited as proof the program was working. But right-sizing also meant dealers who were already starved of traffic suddenly had less product to showcase. The floor felt emptier, and customers who did visit sometimes walked away because the specific model they wanted was not in stock. One dealer compared it to running a grocery store with half the shelves bare. From corporate headquarters, it was a strategy to buy time and restore financial credibility. On the ground, it was another squeeze. Dealers wanted relief, but they also needed volume, and right-sizing delivered neither in full. The plan might have calmed investors briefly, but another storm loomed that Harley could not control. It was not about shipments or consumer tastes, it was about geopolitics and tariffs. Tariff trap. Global politics hit Harley harder than any competitor. For years, the company walked a tightrope between its American identity and its global supply chain. When trade wars flared, Harley was always caught in the middle. In 2025, the threat of new tariffs landed like a hammer. The company warned investors that duties on imported parts and exported motorcycles could cost as much as $175 million in a single year. That kind of burden would not just eat into profits, it could erase them. The uncertainty was paralyzing. Dealers in border states worried whether customers from Canada or Mexico would suddenly face higher prices. Executives scrambled to recalculate margins, but no one could offer clarity. Investors punished the stock again, fearing that Harley had no leverage in international politics. Critics pointed out that the company had been here before, in earlier trade spats with the European Union, and had failed to build a long-term buffer. Now the cycle was repeating, but with stakes higher than ever. Dealers feared they would become collateral damage in trade wars they never asked for. Customers already hesitant about high prices could be driven away entirely by tariff-driven hikes. For small-town showrooms, one policy decision in Washington or Brussels could mean the difference between survival and permanent closure. The tariff trap made one thing clear. Harley's problems were not just cultural or financial. They were geopolitical, and survival demanded leadership strong enough to steer through storms that spanned continents. That is why the board turned to a surprising new figure, one who did not come from the motorcycle world at all. New CEO Gamble. Harley's new leader came not from Detroit, but from Topgolf. In the autumn of 2025, the company announced that Artie Starrs, former chief executive of the entertainment chain, would take over as Harley-Davidson's CEO. The choice stunned observers. Starrs had no direct experience with motorcycles, manufacturing, or the long history of Harley's battles with unions and regulators. What he did have was a reputation for building lifestyle brands that blended experience with commerce. The gamble was obvious. By hiring Starrs, Harley's board signaled that the company was less focused on engineering breakthroughs and more on reimagining the dealership as a cultural hub. His background suggested a strategy of turning Harley into not just a motorcycle manufacturer, but a lifestyle company, complete with entertainment-style experiences. To investors, the move looked like fresh thinking. To many dealers and riders, it looked like a disconnect. How could a man who spent his career in golf and hospitality understand the grit of the open road? Critics argued that Starr's appointment was a public relations move rather than a strategic solution. They feared the board valued optics over substance, hoping a lifestyle executive could charm investors. Yet charm would not pay debts or lure new riders, and skepticism shadowed his every introduction. Yet Harley had run out of safe options. With sales collapsing, demographics aging, and politics pressing, the brand needed reinvention or risked irrelevance. Starrs represented a last roll of the dice. Whether he would save Harley or accelerate its unraveling remained an open question. Industry dominoes. Harley's panic was not isolated. It was a warning for the entire powersports sector. Rivals like Polaris, maker of Indian motorcycles, also faced shrinking demand as the cost of living crisis forced riders to delay big-ticket purchases. Adventure touring brands such as BMW and KTM, once buoyed by affluent professionals, began to report softer orders in North America and Europe. The pattern was unmistakable. Motorcycles, long marketed as symbols of freedom, were still luxury goods at heart. and luxury goods were the first casualties when household budgets tightened. Dealers from competing brands quietly admitted they were watching Harley struggle with a sense of dread. If the industry leader could not hold the line, what chance did smaller names have? Analysts compared it to a domino chain. One falls, then another, until the whole sector must reinvent itself or collapse. Even companies with strong innovation pipelines could not ignore the shift in consumer psychology. Riding was becoming less a mass aspiration and more a niche pursuit, vulnerable to generational changes in taste. Analysts warned that the downturn could spill into adjacent markets, from apparel makers to parts suppliers. When dealerships close, entire ecosystems collapse. Local leather shops, aftermarket exhaust builders, and even biker rallies feel the shock. Harley's struggles were a spark, but the fire threatened the whole riding culture. This broader slump meant that Harley's crisis carried symbolic weight. It was no longer just about one brand. It was about whether the motorcycle industry itself could adapt to an economy where mobility meant apps, ride shares, and electric scooters rather than heavy touring machines. And as the industry trembled, politicians seized their chance to make Harley a talking point. Political weaponization. Politicians suddenly discovered Harley was more than motorcycles. It was a talking point. In Washington, lawmakers invoked Harley as shorthand for American industry under siege. Tariff debates turned into passionate speeches about protecting factory jobs in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Campaign ads featured candidates posing on Harleys, promising to shield the brand from foreign competition. What had begun as a corporate sales problem morphed into a national political symbol. The irony was that Harley had long globalized its supply chain, moving production of certain models overseas and exporting to Europe and Asia. Yet in the political imagination, it remained a pure red, white, and blue icon. That contradiction made it a perfect pawn. Tariff proposals aimed at punishing China or the European Union often included Harley by name, as though saving dealerships was a patriotic duty. For some voters, it worked. Harley stood in for nostalgia, manufacturing pride, and blue-collar identity. For others, the spectacle looked hollow, a cynical exploitation of a brand that had already moved beyond its roots. Union leaders also entered the fray, demanding that Harley be treated as a case study in protecting American labor. They argued that every tariff debate was not about numbers on a spreadsheet, but about welders, machinists, and sales staff whose livelihoods depended on keeping the brand's factories alive. Regardless of perspective, the political weaponization of Harley further complicated its future. Dealers were left wondering whether they were pawns in a national debate rather than partners in a business. And as politics heated up, another generational challenge threatened to make those debates irrelevant. Gen Z rejects chrome. To young riders, Harley's Chrome Thunder looks like their grandfather's bike. Surveys showed that Generation Z consumers wanted motorcycles that were lighter, smarter, and cheaper to own. They were drawn to models that integrated smartphone connectivity, offered advanced safety features, and carried price tags well below the $20,000 threshold. For them, rebellion meant flexibility, not bulk. A 500-pound cruiser dripping with chrome was not a symbol of freedom. It was a financial burden. Brands like Honda and Yamaha leaned into this preference, offering smaller displacement machines that were fuel-efficient and easy to handle in urban environments. Electric startups attracted tech-savvy buyers who valued sustainability and gadgetry over heritage. Harley's attempts to bridge the gap with bikes like the Livewire failed because they carried Harley's pricing model into a demographic that measured value in different terms. Younger riders were not seduced by nostalgia. They wanted access, speed, and customization at scale. Dealers saw the generational gap every weekend. Showrooms filled with retirees looking for their last big ride, while 20-somethings browsed online marketplaces for used sport bikes or e-scooters. Harley's future market was voting with its wallet, and it was voting elsewhere. That demographic rejection set the stage for the most painful question of all. What happens if Harley cannot reinvent fast enough? Many younger riders also view Harley ownership as socially outdated. Online forums mock the brand's heavy cruisers as dad bikes, while TikTok videos celebrate smaller electrics and cafe racers. For Generation Z, motorcycles are about self-expression and fast-changing digital tribes, not about inheriting their grandfather's highway tradition. You've stayed this far, don't stop now. Subscribe and join the insiders who see the full picture before anyone else, because the next revelation will change everything again. Legacy on the line. If Harley cannot reinvent itself, its dealerships will be the first casualties of a dying empire. Already, closures across the country showed how fragile the network had become. Local communities lost their gathering spots, small business owners lost livelihoods, and entire regions watched a cultural symbol fade. The collapse of dealerships would not only devastate local economies, but also erode the mystique that Harley spent more than a century building. For Wall Street, the brand was still a ticker symbol, but for riders it was a living legend. That legend is what allowed Harley to sell not just motorcycles, but a lifestyle. If the legend falters, the bikes become just another overpriced product in a crowded market. Investors worry about balance sheets, but dealers worry about the faces missing from weekend events, the empty parking lots, and the sound of silence where an engine's roar once shook the walls. Historians warn that if Harley falters, it will mirror the decline of other once-dominant American icons like Kodak or Pontiac. The lesson is brutal. Heritage alone cannot guarantee survival. Dealers know this too well, standing on the front lines as proud custodians of a legend that may soon vanish. The survival of Harley now rests on a knife's edge. Arty stars may bring new ideas, politicians may grandstand, and competitors may stumble. But without a reinvention that resonates with the next generation, the brand risks becoming a museum piece. Harley's legacy is not guaranteed. It hangs in the balance, and the next move will determine whether the company rides into a new future or into history. You've just seen how deep this crisis runs, and now the choice is yours. You can click away, forget it, and be caught off guard when the next shockwave hits, or you can stay ahead of it. Hit subscribe right now, because this is only the beginning. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's build this conversation together and share this with someone who needs to understand what's really happening. Don't wait until it's too late. The story is still unfolding, and you'll want to be here when the next chapter breaks.